Welcome to the Power Curve. I'm Holly Scott. In our podcast, I have the opportunity to chat with accomplished industry executives regarding decisions they've made around their career path with the hope of empowering you, our listeners, as you navigate your own career trajectory. Today, I am thrilled to have Marinela Gombosev here, the CEO of Evoke Neuroscience. She's joining me. Thanks for joining today, Marinela.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. So let's jump in because you have a very unique foundation. You're an electrical engineer that is now a CEO of a med tech startup, health tech startup. Could you share with us a bit about your early foundation and how that perhaps best prepared you for your future?
Yeah, sure. I think going through an undergraduate program in engineering is obviously builds a lot of problem-solving skills. But it was really that inner drive in me that I've always kind of felt and couldn't quite put a finger on early in my career, that later I recognized as really strong ambition to advance, and ambition to make an impact, ambition to, do things beyond my current skill set. And so it was really the engineering degree that gave me the platform, a technical platform to advance in STEM fields, but it was this internal drive that really took me to the position that I'm in today.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I love to see women who start in engineering and have that drive early on. And I'm curious because there's some similarity, as I've seen, between successful executives where that foundation was laid early, in your upbringing, in your adolescent, and as parents too, right? How can we empower our children and guide them towards core degrees that are really significant and then perhaps helped you to set you up for success? Was that something that was laid in your family early, or was that an expectation? Did you come from a family of engineers? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so interestingly, I was basically pushed into engineering by my mother, who is not an engineer.
Love it.
My dad is an engineer. My dad's an electrical engineer. And so I had considered a variety of disciplines, including becoming a psychiatrist. And my mom basically said, why would you want to listen to other people's problems all day? You'll have enough of your own in your life. So, she's a very pragmatic, practical, kind of big picture woman, and really helped steer me in those early days. And it was so essential because, I got to say, like, growing up and going through high school, there was really very little to go on in terms of choosing your degree and what that might bring for your very long career. Even when I sought it out and tried to get my head around what does an engineer do? How do we, what actually is a day-to-day like for an engineer? And I wasn't even asking questions at that time about what does the career path look like. It was very difficult. And so, one of the things that I'm passionate about now is helping middle school and high school girls kind of get a better sense for what engineering is about, and the kind of career path and choices that you get to have by studying really any STEM discipline.
And that is so incredibly valuable right now, right? As we look towards the future, especially with electrical and computer science and the trends associated across all industry lines. We're seeing it in med tech, health tech. Certainly that foundation of understanding computer science, understanding electrical engineering is likely going to be one of the highest in-demand skill sets over the next 10 years, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, everything is, so data-driven now, whether you're even in the arts or other industries. Data and fundamental STEM skills touch everything. Marketing, obviously digital marketing is huge, and just understanding the basics of STEM really helps with, I think, any career path.
Certainly. And going back to your adolescence, just because I think this is incredibly interesting, I see a commonality between leaders who have pushed through very difficult times. And sometimes our early childhood experiences set that table, right? And you shared with me that at 14, which is an incredibly impressionable age and one that's probably one of the most difficult, you not only came to a new school, you actually learned English, right? You didn't speak English until that age. Is that
Right.
correct? And I just find that fascinating. What about that experience and pushing through and then and going from that to leading teams within your school and leading engineering organizations? What about that experience perhaps helped you to better prepare for challenges downrange?
Yeah. I've actually given this quite a bit of thought over the years. And, I grew up in Bosnia, former Yugoslavia originally. And when I was 8, the war broke out. Civil War. We had to leave. We were lucky to get out. And my parents took us to Germany, where we had some family. And so I spent 5 years growing up in Germany from age about 8 to 14, roughly. And there I also went through a number of changes, as you can imagine, and learned to speak German and all that went with that, and new culture and all of that. So then coming into the U.S., we actually came into the U.S. as war refugees, and when I was 14, and really worked our way through the welfare system, starting with food stamps, and all of that comes with that, rent control, and really some incredible experiences. But not for 1 minute, reflecting on this, did we feel like we were disadvantaged or in not able to achieve a better life. And then that was because my mom and dad set that example. You focus on your goals, you pursue them, you take risks to get there, you put one foot in front of the other, and whatever gets thrown your challenges get thrown your way, you work through them. And I can't imagine a better way to demonstrate ability to persevere, to resilience, than through examples like that. So I think it absolutely had a profound impact on me as a human, as a leader. I just view challenges differently. In a lot of ways, they don't seem daunting, and I also view risk a little bit differently. And that's probably why I'm in an entrepreneurial environment now, because the willingness to accept greater risk. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's and it's such a profound reflection, not only on business. Your teams are stronger when they are put to the test and put or go through challenges and obstacles, and that lays that foundation so that they're better equipped to tackle the next, right? And then as parents, of course, and I'm in a similar place where I'm fortunate to be able to give my children more than I was given. Not that I didn't have love and support and all those other most critical things, but you also don't want them to be too sheltered, right? You don't want to protect them too much, right? You don't want
Yes.
them to not earn those scars that turn into armor for the challenges that are set forth. So that foundation is incredible, and I can see how that impacted you. Well, there's a common theme of putting you in uncomfortable positions and having that take you to the next level. And we've again talked about your own career over time, and I've seen that pattern where whether it came to you or you asked for it. Like you said, you were the one to raise your hand, and I want to be a commercial facing person, even though I've been grown up through product development, or I want to do these different things. And that ask, that ability and confidence to go for it and put yourself on that edge gives you such a unique perspective to not only lead companies and lead people, but to help to be an example for those who aspire to that.
Yeah, 100%. And, I always say I like to be comfortable being uncomfortable. That's something that I strive towards. It's just an area that I think has been rewarding to me in the past. And yes, it's, uncomfortable and it can cause frustration. But I've noticed that the most growth, personally and professionally, is when I've been challenged, 100%. And so I intentionally put myself in those situations. And you're right, it does take a certain amount of confidence. I didn't always have that. It's taken, my confidence has built over the years. And I think particularly as it relates to women, there's sometimes this idea that maybe we shouldn't be ambitious, maybe we shouldn't reach so far, and then that's not the case for everybody. And it certainly wasn't overt in my case. But in order to be confident and go for it, I had to really work on that and getting comfortable doing that. And that takes a lot of support too, a lot of mentorship, inner work, and just really soul searching of like, hey, what do you actually want from your life, from your career, and then going for it.
Sure. No, that's so true. Well, you went for it when you left aerospace to go to medtech. So not only were you leaving a giant organization, you were leaving a different industry. You were leaving an industry and going towards something novel and new. What were there experiences within aerospace and within the larger infrastructure that helped you to be successful in your early days in that transition? What were some of the most resourceful lessons perhaps that you could share?
Oh yeah. Well, being in aerospace and then going into med device, first of all, I knew that would be a significant transition. It would take some time. So I gave myself a year while working in aerospace to basically go through this transition. I found parallels, the area of the skill set of project management, in R&D, was very similar in aerospace, to what it is, and what it can be in medical devices. You're dealing with a regulated industry. You've got the FAA versus the FDA. The product development life cycles are both quite long versus, let's say consumer products. And so, the shift ended up being more natural, through that kind of leveraging of the skill set in the regulated industry. But certainly being part of a large organization, I learned a ton. You really get to see, people say what good looks like, and no organization is perfect. And that's not what, my point is. But my point is that you see how large organizations have organized and developed systems, that are leveraged at scale. So you get to see what organizations that have been around for 100 years, have honed over many, many decades. And you also get to see the dysfunction that can arise from being in a large corporation. And, depending on kind of how you're bent, if you prefer to be more entrepreneurial or more of the corporate environment, those are all great lessons regardless. So I really enjoyed my experience in a larger company. Really got to see, behaviors and of executive level staff, as well as very, very experienced people who are in senior executive roles, and what their positions looked like versus those of, let's say, on this other end of the spectrum in startups, the executive roles look like. So it was valuable for sure.
Do you think that was an important step for you out of college? I have some young new grads who say, I'd really like to go to a startup, but I hear that I need the big company experience. Do you have any thoughts one way or another on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a sample of one from my perspective, but I do think having the big corporate experience continues to serve me well in my entrepreneurial career. I tend to recommend that track. Not to say that you couldn't do extremely well in the other way, but for me, it gave me a lot of perspective, and vision that I otherwise wouldn't have had.
Sure. And I can code on with that. I've seen how the larger corporate style of engagement can equip the C-suite, C individuals, to work with investors, with Wall Street with, in a different way, because, and strategic partners and so forth, because you have that inside exposure, right? You know what some of these companies, how they run, what's important to them, what metrics they drive on, and like you pointed to, they have worked the kinks out over many years, and sometimes that serial startup professional may not have as much credibility at the table with someone once they start those negotiations. So I agree with you. It is something that is valuable. Getting it early tends to be when you have more patience to get it, to get the right experience. So yeah, I can see that being valuable.
The other thing I think reflecting on the corporate experience is kind of seeing how in larger organizations, in order to make a decision, you have to build a group of stakeholder their buy-in. You have to get buy-in from a number of stakeholders. So that involves often relationship building and more time to get everybody on board, and seeing how to use influence and the right relationships and understanding of the corporate structure to achieve a shared goal. And that's not typically a skill set that's often called upon in an entrepreneurial career, but certainly can be very useful, when you're doing bigger picture stuff like, fundraising and sharing vision and getting people on board. Yeah.
Absolutely. I also point to your experience as a project manager or product owner. I find that is an incredible foundation for someone to learn how to engage across functional lines without direct authority. So you're getting buy-in from key stakeholders in various disciplines with various backgrounds, and you have to get them on the same page with a common goal without necessarily having them directly report to you, and that differential is powerful when it comes to your ability to influence and engage, especially as you gain in leadership traction.
Yeah, and just a finer point on that is, being in product ownership and project management really teaches you how to bring things to conclusion. It's a rigorous discipline that you have to get things done and finished and checked off. And I found that people who figure that out early in their career can excel more quickly. I call it the done gene. Do you have the relentless pursuit of getting things done? It's so easy to get things started, right? Like, hey, there are great ideas that are launched all the time, but getting them done is the really tough part that you have to stick with. And so I always think of myself as practicing, my ability to get things done, flexing that done gene.
I love that. I need to teach my boys the done gene. Okay, that one I'm taking home over the weekend. Speaking of family, right? I kind of shirk at the thought of work-life balance, and I absolutely love what you have called work-life integration. I think that's such a profound way to state what we all are feeling, right? Especially in this world that we live in, where so many of us don't leave an office to go home. We're on 24/7, regardless of where you stand. So you're an active CEO with a family. Any tips for those young professionals who want it all, right? They want it all. They don't want to sacrifice. They don't want to miss T-ball, and they don't want to miss dance, but they want to rule the world. What are some of the things that you've learned over the years?
Oh yeah, such a good one. I struggled, like so many of us, for a long time with this work-life balance concept, and I came across this article that said, no, this is a myth. It doesn't work, because balance implies, having enough of each, and it's just life isn't that way. And the concept really should be integration. And so once I started thinking of it that way, it really helped me take a proactive role in organizing my life in a way that worked for me. And so and I evolved into this, but basically I take the attitude now that in order for me to be an effective CEO, a great mother, a great partner to my husband. I'm going to organize and design my life in a way that makes that all work. And one of the big keys is having a support system around you, including your partner to a large degree. I have an incredible husband who is, very supportive of my career and our family and our common objectives, and that goes a long way in enabling me to, um, you know, be the best that I can be in any one area. Um, I'm very lucky to have a family around me as well that helps with, childcare and whatnot. But you also, I think the other thing I've learned is you have to hire good help, and a lot of us, maybe, especially earlier in your career, you don't think, oh, I don't need a nanny. I can cook dinner. I can do all this. I can, and yes, you can, but do you want to or should you? Is that the most effective use of your time? So if you really think about it from a, let's say, even a CEO perspective, like what's the most effective use of my time? It's quality time with my child, not distracted and, try not to, uh, burn something in the oven. Um, and mind you, I love cooking, so that's something I do take the time to do. But that's by choice because I've now gotten to a point where I've gotten enough of a support system around me to make that work.
Yeah, that's it's critically important, and it's funny that you refer to being a CEO and reference that mindset in your own family, because I know it took me a while to get to the point where I was comfortable saying my time is worth this. I need to hand off some of these activities. I need to do this because, like you said, you want the quality time with your family to stand. So it is about quality and making sure that you get to that position early. So if you can start thinking about that earlier in career, I think we'd live with a lot less guilt, right? We'd live with a lot less stress over, gosh, I'm not doing everything perfectly. It's not about doing it perfectly. It's about making it realistic and making that time meaningful when you carve it out, right?
Yeah, yeah, the guilt thing can be a real challenge, and I think just by being intentional about how you spend your time, you can avoid a lot of that guilt of not enough, because there's never enough. It's never enough time for anything. So you got to get yourself out of that trap as best as you can. So yeah, this is, and I'm by no means perfect at it, but these are just some tactics I've implemented.
Well, you're doing a great job with it, that's for sure. Now, as a CEO, I we all run into unexpected challenges, right? As you sit in a young company, and especially weathering the last 12 months or so of this insane pandemic that we're all sorting through. What are some things that have surprised you and that you've had to deal with? Any curveballs or any challenges as a leader, and perhaps some thought on what problem solving skills you use to get through it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the pandemic is a big thing that's affected all of us, and we've all read and heard a lot about leading through challenges and uncertainty and all of that. And I guess my take on it that has evolved my thinking on leadership and how to handle a tremendous amount of uncertainty is when the pandemic hit, we had to do all these things, right? Like, assess the situation, regroup. We closed our New York office very early on. We had to, the major word is pivot. Everybody has been pivoting this whole time. But one thing that really struck me is sort of the humanity of it all, the effect on humans, and then what that meant for me and my company, as a leader of my company, and how to deal with that aspect. So um, I think my first reaction when the pandemic happened was to just kind of dig in, block it all out, and focus on our work, because man, things were plummeting. Things were, our book of business was at risk. Patients weren't going to their doctors for a short time, and things were in crisis mode. So dealing with crisis mode, and how do we just get through that? So of course you've got to deal with the crisis mode, but then became pervasive, right? And the pandemic stuck around, and one of the things that I had to, talk myself into, recognizing is like, okay, this is something that's going to persist, and we have to acknowledge that each of us is affected by this as a human. And that became very apparent because now we're all of a sudden in homes, right? We're working from home, our families around us, our dogs are barking. It was a very in a way a humanizing experience, because it broke down a lot of barriers that otherwise were present by being in an office environment. So I really took time to recognize that the events of the pandemic have a profound impact on us as humans, and that we take that all to work, and we had no choice but to take it to work. So really working on leading with empathy first, telling people that, hey, you are number one. You are, as people are the most important thing, and let's figure out how to work in this environment. Let's figure it out together. So, there's this just recognition of this tremendous amount of uncertainty causes anxiety, causes people to worry about, their job, their security, their health. And so the curveball for me was really this, getting hit with a hammer over my head on, you can't just separate things. You can't just put your head down and just work and ignore what's happening around you. You have to, and it's to our benefit to as leaders to recognize that we're all human and we bring all that stuff to work. And how do we treat each other? How do we set up policies, procedures? How do we have conversations that address that, take that into account, and then use that to build better relationships with each other and get more aligned on goals and have better long-term performance? And that's really what I've come to pretty firmly believe as a leader, is that when you have the ability to have a relationship that you can generate with staff, you can't do that in all organizations because they're just too big, but to the extent that you're able to with your staff, and leading with empathy ultimately results in a lot more buy-in, stronger connections, and longer term performance and retention. So that's something that I've, an outcome for me from this whole pandemic and how we work now.
It sounds like a bit of a gift, in terms of seeing this as not, of course, the challenge has been laden on, but the fact that it is the great equalizer in terms of everyone is concerned about health, their own family members. It doesn't matter what function, it doesn't matter what role you have in the organization, right? And the authenticity of people now that they are working remote and from home and with kids home and with dogs and with pets, it does have an element of that humanity and that ability to say, look, we're more alike than we are different, and I think that's something that hopefully we can take with us, as business improves and the overall state of our situation improves. Hopefully some of these lessons will stay with us.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think in some ways it can be empowering, right? Like, if your toddler breaks into your room in the middle of an important meeting, guess what? You're not the only one. Like you said, it's an equalizer. I've literally been on investor calls where that's happened to the investor, and it's like, hey, that's okay.
Yes.
You don't have to pretend like that part of your life doesn't exist. And yes, you carry on as a professional and you keep things going. But I think it can be very empowering, especially to women who have families, who have other obligations. Like, yeah, that is my a husband taking care of my toddler right now in the background.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't have to apologize for it. It just is. So I think that could be, like you said, a positive outcome as well.
Exactly. Exactly. So thinking ahead, we're both in this industry that we absolutely love. What are you most excited about in terms of the future? What are you most optimistic about in terms of trends and your observations and where things are headed?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a ton of change happening in medtech, and some of it really driven by the pandemic, which I'll mention a bit later. But really, the what I think the most exciting trend is the consumerization of healthcare, and really integration of wellness into healthcare. You're seeing companies like Apple and Google really dive headfirst into healthcare, and they have been for some time. And this trend will continue. And so, what I think is really great about that is that it follows the same trend that patients are taking more and more ownership of their own healthcare and their own wellness. More and more consumers are seeking out information about their own health, and it's not just from their doctor, but obviously through internet channels, podcasts. Um, so this is also something that I'm excited about for Evoke because, when we talk about mental health and cognitive health, the younger generations are a lot more comfortable talking about and taking a proactive approach to mental and cognitive health, and being in the diagnostic space for cognitive and mental health disorders. I feel like that's a really, budding opportunity, given these consumer trends, and given the willingness to talk about our brain health, if you will.
Well, I know from both a device as well as biotech and pharma perspective, neurodegeneration and cognitive health overall is a highly anticipated area here over the next 10 years or so, because there's just with Evoke there's very few good options to diagnose and help treat this patient population. It's quite complex. So it's exciting to see what Evoke is working on, and that you've continued to power through even with a challenging year, because this is a really amazing product and opportunity for the patient population for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's a, long-term goal, right? This is not a field that's going to get solved overnight. But interestingly, even aging has now been labeled as a disease, implying that it could potentially be cured. So, we're focused on neurodegenerative aspects of aging, but people are in the longevity industry, which is going to, be huge, I imagine, soon. There are people attacking aging in and of itself as a disease, and I think those trends are really exciting too. So we shall see what happens,
We'll
but
see. Yeah, we'll
yeah.
see what happens with that. It feels like a disease. Aging feels like a disease when I wake up in the morning sometimes. But so, additional thoughts. I'd love for your 2 cents on that young person in career who says, "Gosh, I want to be Marinela when I grow up." What are some of the final thoughts that you might have for those aspiring professionals?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about willingness to take risks. You can call them 50% jobs. I've heard that term from a mentor of mine, is where 50%, the other 50% you don't know. And it really is a way to stretch yourself, and shooting for that versus shooting for those jobs that you're very confident you can do. Um, then, building and really and be intentional about creating your own fan club. It's tough out there as you're trying to uh, become a leader, be a leader. It can be a very lonesome kind of experience, but having a really strong network of um, mentors is one thing, and then that's a whole nother conversation. But having a fan club, people who believe in you, that made a big difference for me. And instead of saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't be so ambitious, maybe you can stick in a corporate job. And so I would encourage those who have that inside drive to find people around you that you know want you to see you excel and tell you that.
I love that. Build your fan club early. I do counsel individuals to be extremely cognizant of their brand identity in the market. What value are they bringing the market? And that is a perfect way to think about it. Is you need a fan base that is going to be there to support you as you bring the market value, to reinforce that and create this credibility around you. Great insight. Thank you, Marinela. And lastly, I have to ask, because you got a 3-year-old little boy. What is your best source, your outlet, your therapy for blowing off steam and managing through these long crazy days as an executive at Evoke?
Yeah, I mean, like many of us, I'm a competitive person. Some would say very competitive. So I've always loved sports and, been engaged in a variety of them through my career, through my life, really. But I've come to love beach volleyball. And so that is in fact, my therapy, my weekly therapy. And I, play recreationally and sometimes competitively. And it's just a way to get me outside and have that competitive experience, but also in a very, very healthy environment. And that's something I just relentlessly focus on. And, during the pandemic, it was a different kind of cardio, but some kind of experience to get outside and ideally in a competitive setting.
Yeah, that's excellent. You prioritize your own self-care. It sounds like that's something that you've held close to you, which so many of us tend to, especially in stressful times, forget about, right? Or let it slip. So it sounds like that's important for you.
Yeah, but I couldn't do it without my husband. I mean, some days he just pushes me out the door and says, "You need this. Get out of here."
That. That's fantastic.
So having a supportive partner who recognizes this, there are many days where I wouldn't have gone had it not been for that extra push.
Yeah. We say around our firm, the number one career decision you can make is who you spend your life with. It sets the entire road in cadence, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, Marinela, this has been fantastic. I so appreciate you spending time with us, with me, with our audience, because you have really shared some nuggets that are gold. Thank you again for joining. And I know you and I will be chatting soon. Can't wait for it to be live and perhaps over a glass of wine instead of Zoom and remote.
Yes, we'll look forward to that. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
You got it. Take care, Marinela. Thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of The Power Curve. See you soon.